Will somebody say something to make sure that I can hear you?
What's up, Mr.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hi.
Hello.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen with you, and there's going to be a warm-up that I want you to try to complete. Oops. I'm going to give 2.5, 3 more minutes on the warm-up. I'd write it down. I would do this as normal class as you can do. If you're coming in, I want you just to do the warm-up. You have about 2 minutes left on the warm-up. One minute left. Thirty seconds. All right, let's go ahead and go through these 3 warm-up questions. For number 1, compare which French and Dutch, compared with the French and Dutch interactions with Native Americans, English interaction with American Indians were more often promoted what, and I'm just going to call on people randomly that I see in the chat. So let's start with Violet. What did you say for number 1? D, assimilation of Indians into colonial societies. It's not D. Emma Kate, what did you say? You can type it into the chat or you can just say it. Separation between the groups is right. Yep. So the Dutch and French are going to be very close to Native Americans, whereas the English aren't. Number 2, mercantilism as applied by Britain to its North American colonies meant that the British what, and let's go with Jaden Wilson, what did you say?
I'm gonna guess you meant me. D.
D is right. Yeah, regulated colonial shipping and tobacco production. Good. And then from your notes, your last notes, so this would be the notes from last week, your only notes you had to do last week. There were 2 areas that the USSR and US had to split because they could not agree what to do with them. What were those 2 areas or countries? And let's go with Eli Dorn. What did you say?
Germany and Korea.
Yep, Germany and Korea is.
Shit on. Oh wait, oops.
All right, we're going to now go to Today in History. So these are all the Today in Histories that we've done so far since we've been out of school doing virtual. I'm just putting this up here. You don't have enough time to write them down right now, but you can come back to this lecture. I'm recording this lecture right now. I'm going to put it on my website, and you can just pause it right here and copy down all the Today in Histories that you've missed. For today's Today in History, which is April 1st, this is going to be your Today in History. On April 1st, 1970, President Nixon signed a law that banned cigarette ads from appearing on TV and radio. It was part of a 20-year debate on the health risk of smoking. Again, I would write this down. You are going to have a Today in History quiz. The major reason why you're going to have a Today in History quiz is because it helps your grade. And I'm going to be doing that probably in late April sometime, because we'll probably only have 1 Today in History quiz this semester. Now, if you don't know, in the 1950s, that's really when the first public research started to come out that showed that smoking was linked to cancer. Big tobacco companies paid billions of dollars to try to discredit that research, and in fact actually said that smoking loosened the esophagus and the throat and actually allowed for you to breathe better. They also spent several $million trying to prove that nicotine was not addictive. And before 1970, cigarettes were the most common television and radio ad in the market. They spent more money on ads than anyone else. But by the 1970s, there was enough public pressure that cigarette companies were marketing to children, which was true. They were trying to get people to smoke at a young age so that they would get addicted, so that they would continue to smoke for the rest of their life, that they are going to make it a part of laws or legislation to not allow for cigarette ads. And if you think about it today, there's never been a cigarette ad in your life or my life, on television or the radio. They still do have marketing, but it's like billboards, things like that. I did want to do something on April Fools. April 1st is April Fool's Day. If you're wondering like where that comes from, it comes from 1583. France decided to do away with the Julian calendar and move to the Gregorian calendar. So it's this new type of calendar, and it changed the beginning of the year from being April 1st to January 1st. And if you lived out in the countryside, you didn't hear about this change for maybe up to 10 to 15 years. And so because of that, you still celebrated the new year on April 1st. And city folk looked down on those uneducated country people. And so because of that, they called them April Fools. And that, I don't know exactly where like the practical jokes came from, but that's where the idea came from. Okay, so every time that we have this virtual class, I'm just going to kind of be showing you what you need to make sure you're working on, stuff that's coming up that's due. This week, it's kind of a lot because I've pushed a bunch of different stuff out there, but there are 3 really important things, and then one thing that you should be working on kind of in the background. The first thing is quiz 15. This is over your Great Depression, New Deal politics, and FDR notes. This is due Friday by midnight. Now, understand how this works. You get credit. You have 15% of your grade now in this class is just doing things on time. That's it. All you have to do is do things on time, and you get 15 credit points. So if you do not complete this by Friday by midnight, you will still be allowed to complete it, but you will receive a 0 as opposed to a 100 for credit of doing it on time. Same goes with the crash course. So you have crash course 35 and 36. That's due Friday by midnight. Both of these are on my AP. And then you have your paper, which you should be submitting to me by email at Submit Murray Homework, also due by Friday. I've posted the first part of the AP review, and that is due on May 9th. Does anyone have any questions about any of this stuff right now? You can just, I don't have the chat up. I can't figure out how to pull that back up. Oh, here we go. You can either,
Is quiz 15 on the website?
quiz 15 is on the My AP website, yeah, and then I have a quiz 15 review on my website. So if you want to do that beforehand, you can. And
Okay.
it's open note. I don't want you guys to be fearful of using notes. You can. However, I have to stress to you, you're going to want to study for this before you take it because you will only have 10 minutes. I think actually you only have 9 minutes. The AP review is graded. It's 2 test grades, so it's actually a huge portion of your grade. It's like 15 to 20% of your grade. And I did a video on it that's on my Instagram, Olivia, if you want to go look at that, and it's also on my website now. Why can't we see our quiz 15 grade? I don't know, but it will be in the grade book on Saturday or Monday. So I should be putting those in there pretty quickly.
Mr. Murray, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
My college board isn't working, so I can't log into my AP. Ever since the SAT scores came back, I can't get into the website.
Okay, we'll send me a message on Instagram, like a DM, and then we can figure it out.
Okay.
You haven't taken 15 yet. Quiz 15 is all multiple choice, Ashley. All right, any other questions? All right, last thing before we get into notes. The next time we're meeting is Friday, April 3rd. We will not usually meet on Fridays. We'll usually meet on Mondays and Wednesdays, but they didn't put this schedule out until today or yesterday. So because of that, we couldn't meet on Monday. So we will have another class where we'll go through notes. The notes that we're taking today and on Friday are for your quiz 16, which will be after spring break. If you're wondering how you're going to be assessed on this. At the end of that class, I will also do questions and answers on papers. So if you have lots of detailed questions and answers about the paper, that will be the last time I'll really be answering those questions. Of course, you can email me or DM me those messages and questions beforehand, and I'll answer them. I've been pretty good at getting back to people. All right. Anything else before we get into notes? No. Okay. I would write this down. I am not going to be posting the PowerPoint purely. So if you don't write this down right now, you'll just have to go back through this whole video to watch it. Whole reason why is to try to get you to write it down. And so if you're trying to use something to take a quiz with or something like that, it should be your notes. You should not rely on the PowerPoint. All right. The title of your notes is Truman and Eisenhower. You don't have to write it per se. You can type it if you want to. But title of the notes is Truman and Eisenhower Cold War. This is how the remainder of our notes will go. We're going to go through president by president. We'll talk about what they did with the Cold War and then what they did with their social issues. So today is Cold War for Truman and Eisenhower. Next class will be social issues for Truman and Eisenhower. All right, let's go ahead and get started. If I move too fast, you can either come back to it after I get done with this by just watching this lecture, or let me know and I can go back for a couple seconds. All right, so to start, you need to know what the Cold War is. The The Cold War is going to immediate, right, no more PowerPoints with video lectures. There was a set of notes between the actual war, Jonah, and this one that I posted last week. So the Cold War is a war between the West. The West is the United States and Europe, mainly Great Britain and France, and the USSR. And this was basically seen as who was going to be the dominant power in the world after World War II. There was a big power vacuum, and we've talked about what power vacuums are before, but a power vacuum is basically where all the previously established powers leave. And so now there's a bunch of people trying to become that new dominant power. Great Britain had been the dominant world power for, geez, I don't know, like 150 years, 250 years. And so now it was up to see who is going to be the dominant power. There were only two countries that really had a chance, the USSR, which is Russia, and the United States. And the thing that made this so compelling is that both of them are going to have nuclear weapons, so they can't actually just straight go to war with one another because they'll kill everything. And they're completely different countries. The US is capitalistic. It's all about freedom and inequality when it comes to wealth, meaning that there's winners and losers when it comes to wealth, whereas communism is all about equality when it comes to wealth, but also massive government control. It's called the Cold War because they never fought each other. A hot war is where you were shooting at one another. And this really started directly after World War II of what to do with Europe because the US and the USSR had conquered all of Europe. The US did not want to keep the conquered territory. They wanted to just give it back to the countries that had it before World War II. But the USSR and Stalin, they wanted to keep the parts of Europe that they had to stop a future buffer for future wars. And the thing you got to understand is the USSR had been invaded by Germany twice. They were invaded during World War I and during World War II. So they wanted to have a nice long buffer between them and Germany. So if Germany tried to invade for a third time, they could see them coming from a long way away. And this buffer is called the Iron Curtain. And if you look at this picture right here on the right, this is a representation of the Iron Curtain. That hammer and sickle that you see right there on that picture, that is the symbol for the USSR. I'll give about 30 more seconds to write this down, and then we'll move on to the next slide. And again, if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat, or you can just come on with your audio and ask the question. All right, we're going to move on. Anyone need more time? Just make a quick shout. All right. So this map right here, you don't need to write anything down, but this is what all this fuss was about. Everything that was in blue was conquered by the United States or its allies after World War II. Everything in red was conquered by the Soviet Union. And so you can see it's pretty split down the middle. And there's this white line that's down the middle, and that's basically this big divide. So the US wanted to give all this territory back to Europe, whereas the USSR did not. Yes, I will post a table of contents. That's a good question, Elizabeth. Okay. So how did we try to stop this war from happening, or how did we try to kind of resolve this conflict? We followed a policy of containment. And I don't know if I've ever talked about anything before that's as relevant as right now. So when I used to talk about containment, it was this really abstract idea, which is this basically idea of they didn't want communism to spread because they viewed it like a virus. We right now are obviously dealing with a virus. And so containment is this idea to try to keep communism where it currently is and don't let it get any further. the big debate that's going to be had, I think, about COVID-19, like when we talk about it in history classes, in 20 years or 40 years or whenever, it's going to be, could we have actually stopped the spread of it if we had completely locked down China, if we had contained China? We moved kind of slow in that, and so because of that, it spread globally. Now, it's very likely that the Chinese government was lying about how big of a deal this virus was beforehand, but that's like another debate for another time. But that's the idea of containment. Don't stop communism where it currently is. We're not trying to stop the USSR from not being communist. We just don't want the USSR to make any other countries communist. So President Truman is going to agree with this. So he developed what's called the Truman Doctrine. And this is a big time period of doctrines. Right now, you've only heard about one doctrine so far in US history, which is the Monroe Doctrine, the idea that the US should not interfere with Europe, Europe should not interfere with the United States. And now you have the Truman Doctrine. Eisenhower liked this idea, and Eisenhower is also going to make a doctrine. So we're going to go from 1 to 3 in one class period. But the Truman Doctrine was that the US would intervene and aid nations to stop communism from spreading. Now you have to understand that the people who are most likely going to like communism are going to be poor. If you think about it, let's say that the average person in the United States, if we were communists, would make $50,000 a year. Everyone who made more than $50,000 a year would not like communism. Everyone who made less than $50,000 a year would like communism. So because of that, you want to try to help countries get wealthier so that communism is not as attractive to them. So we gave a lot of money to Europe post-World War II so that there wouldn't be these huge pockets of poor countries, which would then eventually make communism really attractive. And the way that we did this is through something called the Marshall Plan. And we would give money to people, and all people had to do to take this money was agree that they would not be communist. And there was a lot of countries that really needed money because World War II really, really messed up Europe. And again, if you have any questions about any of this, just let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. I'm gonna give you about 30 more seconds to write down.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
can we see the table of contents, like
Yeah,
updated?
I'm gonna post it.
Okay, cool, thanks.
I'll have to do it at the end of this because I can't exit from this view very easily that I'm in. All right, we're gonna move on. Anyone need more time? Just make a yell.
Please, just a few more seconds.
Okay.
All right, I'm done now.
Anyone else? Right. So one of the biggest shifts after World War II is that the United States did not go back to isolationism. It's always fun when we talk about the United States and their foreign policy because the United States was so intensely into isolation. Don't worry about the table of contents right now. I'll post it at the very end of this. But the United States after World War II, this is when we start to be what's better known as we're the global police for a while. And the way that we're first going to kind of not revert back to isolation, one, we're going to join the UN, the United Nations, but second, we're also going to join something called NATO. And you have to understand that during the Cold War, the UN was not very efficient. And the reason why it wasn't very efficient is because for the UN to actually be able to do something, the USSR and the United States had to agree, and they didn't agree on anything. So because of that, the UN did nothing. So the US got its and all of its friends together, and it created a different organization called NATO. And this formed collective security against the USSR. If you look at this map to the right, all the countries in tan and green and blue joined NATO by the 1960s. So what that meant is that if you went to war with France, you didn't just go to war with France, you went to war with the United States, Canada, Portugal, Italy, Luxembourg. I mean, no one really cares if you go to war with Luxembourg, it's like the size of Atlanta, but Belgium, the UK, Denmark, Norway, all those countries are going to attack you. And this was because countries were really fearful that the USSR was going to take over their country, that the USSR was just going to become this new invading power, just like Germany had been during World War II. Now, there were some people who didn't want us to join NATO, and there's still some controversy over NATO because the USSR wasn't going to take over the US. So why would they join? They're not going to get the main benefit, which is that fear being resolved that the USSR is going to take them over. But why we did join it was because it protected us against USSR expansion. Now, one thing just to note, because I think this is really, really important. Everyone talks about how much money we spend on our military. European countries sometimes criticize us for how much we spend on our military. One of the reasons why we spend so much money on our military is because of NATO. We basically are the defense for NATO. Our military, more or less, is NATO's military. And so because of that, you have countries like Germany and France and the UK and Italy. They all spend way, way less money per person on their military than we do. But that's because they don't necessarily need a military, because we still are in NATO. So if somebody went to war with Germany today, the United States would go and help fight help Germany. And so because of that, if you have a best friend who is way, way, way bigger than you and way, way, way stronger than you, and you know any fight that you get into, your best friend is going to come in and beat the living crap out of them, why would you try to get big and strong? There's no real point to it.
Fact.
And so President Trump has actually been highly critical of NATO because he doesn't really see that the United States gets its benefits. Any questions? I'm going to move on in about 30 seconds. All right, anyone need more time? All right. So, were we able to contain communism? No, we weren't. We did kind of try with the Berlin airlift. So the USSR, Germany was divided in half. And if you haven't done the most recent lecture, the lecture before this, then you're not going to really understand this. But Germany was divided in half and Berlin was divided in half. The US controlled half of it. Germany controlled half of it. Berlin was totally on Germany's side of the of Germany. Sorry, I don't know if I explained that correctly. Berlin was totally on the USSR side of Germany. So you should think about this like a divorce, all right? There's this divorce going on. It split Germany in half, and the child is Berlin. Half of Berlin goes to the father, half of Berlin goes to the mother. Well, the USSR is trying to do this thing by cutting off Berlin from the United States and taking Berlin totally for itself. They wanted to make Berlin totally communist. Well, the United States said they're not going to be able to do that because we're just going to fly planes over Berlin every single day and we're going to drop off supplies to them. That way they know that we haven't forgotten about them. And the USSR is going to say, you can't do that. You don't have enough airplanes to be able to do that. No one has that much air power. And the United States really flexed on the USSR for the first time ever. And it was pretty impressive. The USSR actually came out and said there's no way the United States is going to be able to do this. They're going to have to fly 70 flights over Berlin every single day. And no one can fly 70 flights over one city at this time. And the United States said, no, it's going to take about 250 flights a day. And they did it for an entire year, where they just dropped supplies every single day to Berlin. And not only that, they actually dropped it not just to their side of Berlin, but they also dropped it to the other side of Berlin because they couldn't control how the stuff was coming out through the parachutes. And so the USSR actually stopped cutting them off from Berlin to try to get them to stop these plane runs. And so that was the success of containing communism. The biggest failure is that China becomes communist. China is still communist today. It was led by a guy named Mao Zedong. So communism spread to China. And then a mixed is going to be the Korean War, which we'll talk about next. All right, anyone need more time? All right. Let's move on. So Korean War, we have 2 slides left if you're kind of wondering. So Korea was one of these places that was divided between the USSR and the United States, just like Germany was. They couldn't decide what to do, so they made 2 different countries, North Korea and South Korea. And they made this big line. It's called the 38th parallel, still exists today. In fact, if you go to the 38th parallel, it's also called the DMZ today. There is a North Korean soldier and a South Korean soldier, and they're standing and they're looking directly at each other, nose to nose. Yeah, actually, I can go back to that at the end. So North Korea is going to be communist. South Korea is going to be democratic. So North Korea is going to have a dictator. It's the grandfather of Kim Jong-il, which I can't remember his name. And then South Korea is going to elect their own leaders. Now, this war is really interesting because it's completely pointless. North Korea is going to invade first, and I'm going to draw some arrows actually up here to kind of let you see. Not gonna lie, I'm pretty impressed by this arrow I just drew. I kind of just screwed it up. Should I say anything? So North Korea invades first. They push South Korea actually all the way down. Oops, this is not good. To this line, right down here. South Korea is begging for help. And the United States is eventually going to help them. When the United States helps, they get this guy named Douglas MacArthur to come help them. And Douglas MacArthur, guys, was crazy. All right. So he and NATO forces, they come in and they push back to this line right here, back to the original line. Yeah, Henry, what's up? So they push him back to this line right here. Henry, you can just turn on your microphone and ask a question if you want, or you can type it into the chat. So they push back to this line right here. And this is where Douglas MacArthur starts to show his craziness, because he says, no, if we just push back to the original line, North Korea is going to invade again. So what we need to do, I lost my pen. What we need to do is we need to take over all of North Korea. So he pushes up here all the way up to North Korea. When he does this, China is going to see that the United States is only a little bit away from their border. China is also communist, so they're afraid that China is now going to be threatened by the United States. So what China does is they send about 2 million soldiers into North Korea to help North Korea. Now, the United States kills a lot of these Chinese soldiers. Some of these Chinese soldiers don't even have guns. China's just sending as many people as they can. And Douglas MacArthur actually gets crazy enough to where he wants to drop 5 nuclear bombs on China simultaneously. Now, Truman is like, okay, hold on, that's crazy. We're not going to drop 5 nuclear weapons on China. And MacArthur says he might just do it anyway. And so because of that, MacArthur is actually fired. He's the only major general we've ever had fired during a war. We had one during the Civil War, but that was a little different. So China is able to actually draw the United States back with all these guys back to this original line right here. And in 1953, we're going to have Dwight Eisenhower become president. He's not going to want to deal with this war. And so because of that, a truce is signed. Now, North Korea and South Korea never signed the truce. So because of that, they're still kind of actively at war. I'm frozen.
No, you're not. Their Wi-Fi just bad.
Okay. All right. Any questions about this? That's the Korean War. All right, last thing. Eisenhower. We can explain Eisenhower all in one easy motion, because Eisenhower, to me, he was kind of scary, but also like I thought he had the best strategy, where he said, we're not going to really play games with communist countries anymore. We're just going to do this thing called brinksmanship. Brinksmanship is also known as MAD, which is mutually assured destruction, which he just said, if the USSR attacks the United States in any way, we will completely annihilate the USSR off the face of the earth.
Who signed the truce again?
So who ended the war, or who kind of like escalated the war that we just talked about?
I don't know. Somebody asked who signed the truce.
Oh, the truce. The United States signed the truce actually with China. But the North Korea and South Korea, they never actually signed the truce. So this is his idea of mutually assured destruction. And this is kind of what's followed still to this day, which is basically this idea that if you dropped a nuclear weapon on the United States would use all of its military might to just completely wipe you off the face of the earth. One thing that Eisenhower did do, all these Middle Eastern countries at the time, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, they were getting their independence. They had been colonies beforehand. And so now these new baby countries, they're highly impressionable. Think about them like 9th graders in high school. And so they're trying to figure out, well, who do I want to be like when I become a senior? And there's two, kind of think about it like two different angels sitting on their shoulder. One of the angels is the US, and the other angel is the USSR. So Eisenhower wanted to make sure that the Middle East, that they became more like the United States than they did like the USSR. The thing is, they're not like either of us, and it's taken us about 70 years to figure that out. It should be noted, it's around the 1950s that we figure out the Middle East has a ton of oil. So this is part of the reason why we want the Middle East to be our friends. Now, I'm going to let you guys know, outside of Theodore Roosevelt, I probably have the second biggest man crush on any president is Dwight Eisenhower. There's lots of reasons why. I'm very saddened that I'm limited in the amount of time I can talk to you about him. But one of the things that he was really good is he was very prophetic. And what I mean by that is he was able to see far into the future. So one thing that he suggested was that we were going to develop this idea called a military industrial complex, which means that our military is going to employ so many people, and we're going to build up so many military weapons that there's not going to be any way for us to actually shrink our military, even in times of peace. It is Man Crush Wednesday. Wow, didn't even plan that. Should have put some pictures up here of Eisenhower just so you could have seen how cool he was. Anyway, so this idea of a military buildup totally happened, and we still have it today. Our military is massive. We spend a ton of money on our military, and we're not really even at war with anybody. But we can't actually shrink our military today. It would actually be complicated if we did that, because so many people are employed by the military that if we shrunk the military down, a lot of people would lose their jobs. The first way, though, that we built up our military was with nuclear weapons. So if you look at this chart on the right-hand side, this shows how many military weapons we built up at the end of Eisenhower's presidency. He was president until 1960. So by the time Eisenhower was president in 1960, we had almost 30,000 nuclear warheads. It should be noted that most people think if we dropped 15 to 25 nuclear weapons in a single year, it would end all life on Earth because of a nuclear winter. And then you can see actually that the USSR caught up to us and surpassed us with 40,000. And then that we've both actually shrunk down our weapons to about 6,000 to 7,000 each. All other countries on Earth that have nuclear weapons, it's Great Britain, France, China, India, Israel, North Korea, and Pakistan. There are these little lines down here. You can't even really see them. There's only about 20 nuclear weapons between all those countries. Great question. How do you get rid of a nuclear weapon? So you can disarm it. That's pretty easy. The radioactive material you actually can't get rid of. And so what they did when they got rid of all these weapons in the 70s and 80s for the United States is we actually carved out a mountain. You can go Wikipedia it. It's pretty interesting. It's in Nevada. And we just put all the radioactive material in Nevada. And then Nevada was like, we don't want any more radioactive material. So today we pay different states to take on radioactive material. And what they literally do is they just dig a big hole. They put it in the ground. They cover it with lead because lead stops it from leaking to other places. But the problem is it's going to be there for the next 20 to 50,000 years. So you can't really get rid of radioactive material. It's going to be there for a very long time. All right. Guys, this is notes. If you have any questions, let me know. And I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, you guys can go ahead and get off. This was fun. This actually made me feel more normal than almost anything I've done in the past 2.5 weeks. Miss you guys, miss teaching you. Hope you're doing well.
Mr. Murray, I have a question.
Okay. Yes, I'll go back to that slide, Ashley. Sorry.
Will notes be done like this, like for the remainder of the semester?
Like, yeah, this will be our basic format that we'll follow. When you have a quiz, like when you have quiz 16, I'm going to do a little bit of like a review after this, but yeah, this is how it should be.
How soon will we be able to retake old quizzes?
So quiz 11, 12, 13, and 14, they're already on my AP. So you can go do those. I'm planning on working some during spring break because if I'm just being totally honest, I don't have anything else to do. So I'll be posting the crash courses during that week, so you could retake those during that week, or like any week after. For quiz 15, let's say you take quiz 15 today or tomorrow and you bomb it. You can be able to retake that after Friday. I just reassign it, and then you can just go take it again. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, so the buffer part, the USSR was really afraid that Germany was going to invade for a third time, Natasha. So what they did is they wanted all these other countries that Germany would have to basically go through before they got to the USSR, so that they wouldn't actually invade the USSR again. It's kind of how we use oceans. We're not really afraid of buffer countries, because if you're coming at the United States, we're going to see you coming from a long way, because you're going to have to go across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. Make sense?
Can you show the table of contents?
Table of contents, yeah. Henry, this will be posted on my website, Henry. If you go on my website, if you click on Truman, Eisenhower, Cold War notes, you'll find this.
Are you gonna post the table of contents
Let's
on your
actually-
website too?
I will, and let's just wait for the table of contents, guys, until next class, if you don't mind, because I'd have to create the
Okay.
whole slide. Any other questions?
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
do we ever talk about the Sino-Soviet split?
No.
Okay.
We would have if this would have been covered during, so this is not going to be stuff on your AP test.
Gotcha.
So we're not going to go quite as deep into it. We may talk about it a little bit. There's this awesome treaty. It's called the Treaty of Friendship that they signed. And I just think that's really fun and innocent. But Lonnie, you don't have to worry about the crash courses. I don't, Olivia. I will know more about that on Friday. They're releasing exactly what it's going to look like on Friday. My guess is, so it's going to be 45 minutes, and my guess is that they're going to do 3 SAQs, 3 ABC questions. You'll have 15 minutes for each one. Yes, Lonnie, send me that one. Actually, Lonnie, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Send me the ones that all the way up to 38. So you should have crash course, whichever one you missed, and then 35, 36, and then 37, 38. Yeah, just email those to me if you can. Is this how a lot of teachers have been doing their live lessons? For those of you guys who have been in live lessons, does it look similar to what it was like at school, or is it something completely different? Just out of curiosity.
Hell no. It's not.
Mine was.
Yeah, no, it's awful.
It's horrible.
Yeah, we don't
I
really learn
think
anything.
you're like the only teacher I have who's actually getting on the call and like we're taking notes and everything. You're still teaching us.
Yeah.
Mr. McCall's still doing it.
Hold up. Let me find the photo.
On like what website I'm supposed to be checking to figure out what I'm supposed to do.
Well, I'm sorry this is happening to you guys. This isn't how high school should be, especially senior year of your junior year. Man.
What?
Murray.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I have a question. Which crash course are we doing this week?
Good question. This week you have 35 and 36. So it should have been the one that you watched the first week that we were outside of school.
Okay.
And if you need those questions, go on my website. Just click on the first week that we were out under the Corona special page.
Mm.
And the questions are still right there.
All right.
Donovan Gill told me that I made the quiz too easy, that he didn't even need to watch the videos to get a 100. So I guess I'm gonna have to make them harder.
Donovan is different. You don't have to do anything.
I did not say that.
Yeah, you can keep it the exact same.
I'm glad you said that.
I said, imagine not getting a 5 out of 5.
And
Bro,
God,
you
you said that.
Oh, God, you a
And God, you
Let's vote kick Donovan.
God, we finna
straight
hit.
hoe on.
And God, drop the address, little nigga. And God,
Are y'all mad because y'all didn't get 100? Like, that's not
I ain't even do it yet. Okay.
I didn't either. I'm not
Amari,
gonna get
Can we vote kick Donovan?
I didn't even do it yet. Oh God. I'm sorry.
kick Donovan, please.
Well, it's getting real
Chill.
Lord of the Flies in here. All right, guys, I'm gonna end the
Not Lord of
meeting.
the Flies.
But have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you Friday. If you need anything, message me.
It's him.
See you later, Schlatt.
Bye.
See you later, twin.
Hey, Brooklyn.